So, chapter 248, as we mentioned, the primary dynamic of this chapter is getting on a boat which is going to be sailing on Shabbat. And the reason we have these three different opinions as to what the reason is for this halakha is because it's from a Brura in the Gemara, which the Gemara doesn't really explain what the reason is. It just says there's this halakha that you can't get on the boat 3 days before Shabbat. And it doesn't accept if it's for a mitzvah, and it doesn't really explain why. So that's why you have, the Mishna Brura brings these three different opinions in the Rishonim as to what the concern is. Remind me what those three different opinions are? They're good. So the one is oneg Shabbat because of seasickness, yeah?
And breaking Shabbos.
The other one is that you're going to end up breaking Shabbos, that in order to save your life. And before 3 days before Shabbos, you don't have to take on responsibility for Shabbos. But once it's within a few days before Shabbos, you have a responsibility for Shabbos. And what's the third one? That you might end up coming to build a raft. Okay, and we'll see which of these the Shulchan Aruch really considers to be primary, but he brings all of them into a greater or lesser extent. So Shulchan Aruch says you're allowed to go on a boat even Erev Shabbat if it's for a mitzvah. Okay, because once you're going for a mitzvah, so as we said, it overrides the other concerns, and you should make a condition with the captain or the owner of the boat that he should rest, that he shouldn't go on the boat. However, that's if he doesn't, that's still fine, because really this is the way Mishna Brura puts it. This is a mitzvah, not ma'akev. It's a good thing if you can even get him to agree. There's still seats here and here. If you can even get him to agree to not go with the boat on Shabbat, then that's a bonus. That's an extra good thing. But even if he doesn't agree, so then that's fine, because at the end of the day you are going for a mitzvah. However, if it's not for a mitzvah, then you can only go from before 3 days before Shabbat. We mentioned as well, when do we measure these 3 days before Shabbat? So in other words, when is the prohibition to get on this boat? Is it on Wednesday or Thursday? It's an argument. So he says the many Achronim say, what do you say, Hudo?
Wednesday or Thursday or Tuesday or Wednesday?
Well, no, when you can't get on. If you want to ask when you can get on, it's either Tuesday or Wednesday. If you want to ask when you can't get on, it's either Wednesday or Thursday. So the many Achronim say that it's from Wednesday, the prohibition, but the Vilna Gaon says in the name of many Rishonim that it is from Thursday, because the Vilna Gaon says you count Shabbat itself as one of the 3 days. So Shabbat, Friday, Thursday is problematic, and therefore Wednesday is fine. Okay, so the Mishnah Brura doesn't give a clear ruling on this. Then he continues. He doesn't give a clear ruling on it. Yeah, so that you'd have to look into. They're probably going to it in the Dirshu notes, which I haven't looked at this point. Okay, so now he says when you're talking before those 3 days, it's fine, even if it's a boat that's going to be pulled by animals. You might think a boat being pulled by animals is worse. It's like a river boat, right, that the animals walk along the side. You might think that that's worse because the animals are working on Shabbat, but nevertheless it's the same halakha. And even if you will in the end need to end up doing malacha to save your life, that's still considered okay. Now he says, what if it's a very short distance, like it's not this kind of extended 1 week, 2 week or more boat trip? It's just a few days. So you are allowed to then go even Erev Shabbat in the morning, because it's possible that you'll reach there before Shabbat. So that's the basic halakha, is that it doesn't have to be that you actually reach there before Shabbat. As long as it's possible that you'll reach there, or realistic, let's maybe put it that way. If it's realistic that you'll get there before Shabbat, then you are allowed to leave on Erev Shabbat even in that case.
What's the latest time you can leave?
That's going to come up in the next siman of traveling, what hours and everything else. He does say in the morning, Baboker. The Mishnah Brura says once it's already a few hours into the day, then you can't, because you're not going to get there for Shabbat. But it's basically goes on, is there still a realistic chance that you're going to get there before Shabbat? Okay, so the next, but then he says there are some places that have a minhag not to travel at all on the boat on Erev Shabbat, even a short distance, and obviously in those places that's what you would have to follow.
Do we extend this to planes? Because some of the mice are getting on a plane on a Friday morning.
Yes, it's a good question. Not yes, I know the answer. See, the thing with planes is that you're saying like a 16-hour flight where you'd be on the plane over Shabbat, or so that's going to come up. That's going to come up more in the next halakha, traveling shorter distances. Yeah. See, this whole thing with the boat, the whole point is that you're going to be on the boat over Shabbos. So what kind of precautions do you have to take? What kind of factors do you take into consideration in a situation where you'll be on the boat over Shabbat?
But the same halakha for a 16-hour flight would be also good.
Yes, it could be.
Because you can't say to the pilot, listen, Shabbos, let's just go.
That's right, exactly. Okay, so now he says, the Shulchan Aruch says now, the reason that you can't get on the boat is because of Oneg Shabbat, because for 3 days you're going to have all of these, kinds of concerns. And he says, but then that only applies when you're dealing with going on the high seas, right, where it's really going to be stormy and whatever else, and turbulent. But to go on a river, that would be fine to go on Erev Shabbat, provided that it's provided that you know. As long as the river is more than 10 tfachim deep, because then otherwise you're dealing with a problem of tchumim. We'll speak about the tchum a little bit later on. And so too he says, if the Ramor then brings in that if a Jew would need to do this malacha on Shabbat, it's going to be a problem. Even with the rivers, but again, we're not concerned about the animals. So they're bringing in both concerns: the concern of Oneg Shabbat, which is alleviated if you're going on the river, or you could say, presumably, we raised it as a question when we did it here a couple of weeks ago. These big ocean liners, what do you say about the big ocean liners? Because on the one hand, you don't have a concern of seasickness, they're solid and stable. On the other hand, you are out on the high seas. So is the main thing that the halakha stipulated the high seas that's a problem, or is the main thing whether there's an experience of seasickness? So that you'd have to look into as well. Okay, and then as far as tchumim goes, so the idea is that you have your area on Shabbat, and you're not allowed to leave your area on Shabbat. Now, your area, normally on a normal Shabbat, it's not too much of an issue, especially if you're in a city, because your area is the city limits plus a kilometer. Now, if we're in Cape Town, you want to go to the city limits plus a kilometer, you're fine. But if you're in a small town, right, you got to visit the family farm, right, so you've just got the farm plus a kilometer, so you actually haven't got all that far. But the issue comes when you've traveled something like this, so you end up wherever you are, you've actually gone outside of the city limits on Shabbat, plus a kilometer. All you've got is 2 square meters around you. You've actually got a very, very limited area. In fact, I was discussing with Don Anton Klein not too long ago, with flights on Friday. What happened was, I believe it was a flight a couple of weeks ago, came into Joburg from Israel. The plane was delayed and whatever else. They landed after Shabbat came in. So the people got on in good faith, believing that they'd get home in good time for Shabbat. But with the delays and whatever else, they ended up landing. I was already Shabbat. So now there's a question to say, once they're off the plane, can they even move around anywhere?
They're too forced.
Okay, you're the airport, but can you go throughout the airport area?
You can walk around all airports, but that must have told us.
Oh, good. So this is what Don Anton Klein said he recently discovered. I think it's Rabbi Moshe Feinstein who says that even though it says you've only got those 2 meters, but you've still got that area that you came in. In other words, the airport itself. But it's just like the airport, the airport area. You can't then walk home. Yeah, you can't leave there. You can't walk home. If you arrive there after Shabbat, so you didn't have your zone on Shabbat. Your zone is from wherever you start Shabbat. You started Shabbat far away, you didn't have your zone, so you've only got that area.
Did you walk into the airport hotel?
I think so. I think that might be considered part, but it might depend on how it's built. Yeah.
If you know that you won't arrive before Shabbat, but you can't stay where you already are because it's not safe, and can you still get on the flight?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe we'll see it over these next couple of chapters. Hold that thought. But that's what he brings in here. Sorry?
That ties into the caravan.
Yeah, exactly. So now he brings that with, so he brings it in the tchumim when it comes to this boat. That's the question of whether the boat, there's 10 amot of 10 tfachim, beg your pardon, whether it's a meter of water, below the boat or not. Because if it's a meter of water, the boat's like sailing above the earth. So then it's not an issue of tchumim. Whereas if the boat's much closer to the earth, then it's more of an issue of tchumim. Okay. Now, that's what he goes into now in Halakha 3 as well, that when you're allowed to go on the boat Erev Shabbat, if you did go on the boat, then you can't leave the boat from that area, but you can now, stay and have the run on the boat. However, the Ramor brings those who say that you can actually go on and off as long as you made that boat your zone Erev Shabbat. What some people do is they make the boats, let's say the boat's going to be leaving on Shabbos morning. So what they do is they make Kiddush on the boat Friday night, then go home, come back the next day and go on the boat. And then they say that this boat now is their area because they made Kiddush on the boat Friday night. So that was their, they made that boat their home. And the Ramor says, even though he's not crazy about that idea, don't object to it. Now we come into the section of the caravan in the desert, and he says if you're going there where everybody knows, you're definitely going to have to violate Shabbat on this caravan because you're not going to be able to stay here, it's dangerous. So, again, the same thing, you're not allowed to go 3 days before Shabbat, but you're allowed to go before that. And if you go, on a Tuesday and you end up having to break Shabbat for Pikuach Nefesh, that's fine. Now, what about somebody who's making Aliyah and he finds a caravan going on Friday? He can go on such a caravan. However, only if, because this is a mitzvah, however, this only applies if they agree to stop for Shabbat. So if they say, when it came to the boat, we said you should try to say, well, look, are you willing to stop for Shabbat? They say no. You say, okay, it's worth trying. When it comes to the caravan, it's much stricter. You actually have to get their agreement that they're going to stop for Shabbat. If they agree to stop for Shabbat and then change their minds halfway through, they say, actually, we're not stopping for Shabbat, so now you can't stop yourself. So then you carry on with them out of Pikuach Nefesh. And if they drop you off in the city over Shabbat, you're allowed to go through the city on Shabbat because you did nothing wrong. However, if you did not make that arrangement with them that they'll stop for Shabbat, and you just decided to go along with it and it's fine, and even though it's going to be Chilul Shabbat, you consider that, and you weighed it up that it was alright, even though the Halakha says you can't do that, then wherever they drop you off, again, you're only going to have your 4 amot, and you're going to have your 2 square meters. So that the rabbis took away the whole area if you didn't do this in the correct way.
Surely that would be the same as an aeroplane.
Tell me more.
Surely if they drop you off, because if you expect them to stop for Shabbos,
Yes.
and then they get to the Kiddush, it's the same as an aeroplane.
There's no tchumim on the airplane.
But it's the same as a caravan. They drop you off at the place for Shabbos.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know the laws of Tchumim well enough to answer it. Yeah.
So, a good example was if they say that we will stop on Shabbos, would that be like they're going through a dangerous section and they say they refuse to stop because it's so dangerous?
Yeah, you're saying they agreed to it originally, but now they see that they actually can't. Yeah. Yeah.
So then my question would be that you would be able to get things out of maybe not for the life.
Yeah, in other words, you planned that you wouldn't end up getting on that plane, but now it turns out that you have to. Yeah, correct. Good. Now, the question is, we said you're allowed to do some of these things for a mitzvah, that you're allowed to go, even on Friday or whatever on the boat, when it's for a mitzvah. What kind of mitzvah are we talking about? So the Ramor says, some say even doing business or going to see your friend is a mitzvah. So then what's not a mitzvah? Going on a holiday. That's what he says. The only time that it's not a mitzvah is going on holiday. And
What if you're going on holiday to do business?
so he says business is fine. According to this opinion. Let's keep it going because there's a lot to get through in limited time. So he says, some say, even for business and even to see your friend, it's considered a mitzvah. Only if you're going on holiday is that not considered a mitzvah. And therefore some places will even go within those 3 days. They consider everything a mitzvah. And then he says, don't object to them because they have on what to rely. So that language always implies that it's not his preferred way. He's not encouraging that you do it in that way. But if people do that, you can't tell them they're wrong. He wouldn't say that it's right, but you can't say that it's wrong. Okay. 249. Laws relating to Erev Shabbat. So you don't go, now this is more Jared's question, which is getting there in time for Shabbat. But the primary issue that the Shulchan Aruch is worried about. So now you're going from one place to another. You decide, Friday, you decide you're going to go to Hermanus for Shabbat. The main issue that the Shulchan Aruch is worried about is not traffic. He's not worried about you getting stuck halfway. Let's say you can see that you're going to get there in time, whatever. The issue that he's worried about is you're going to get there Friday, 5:30. Shabbos comes in at 6, and you got no food, you got no candles, you got no wine, and you're going to end up having a horrible Shabbat. So again, the concern here is Oneg Shabbat. It's a preemptive concern for Oneg Shabbat. So he says you can't go more than 3 parsas, which is 12 kilometers. Because we want you to arrive while there's still plenty of day and you'll be able to prepare everything for Shabbat. This is whether you're going home or whether you're going to somewhere else. And this is when we're talking about going to a city or a place where you'll be able to prepare Shabbat if you get there in good time. But if you're getting to a place where it's impossible to prepare for Shabbat, you're going out to some little cabin in the middle of nowhere where there's no way you can now go there and buy challahs or whatever. So then you can go there even many parishes. In other words, as long as if it's not actually going to make a difference, you've got what you've got anyway. What you have with you is what you have for Shabbat. So then it doesn't make a difference if you're going to travel a long distance or a short distance. Your quality of Shabbat is going to be the same. When your quality of Shabbat will be significantly improved by being there early and being able to prepare and have nice Shabbat meals, then you're not allowed to go these long distances. The Mishna Brura does add in that obviously you should be careful that you're going to get there in good time, that you're not going to end up running into Shabbat itself. Then he brings in a halakha which is very relevant to this whole thing, that if you sent ahead to the place you're going for Shabbat to tell them that you're coming and what time you're coming, then that's okay. You can go there even pretty late because you'll arrive there and they'll have the bed made and they'll have food ready for you and all that kind of thing. So again, this is only really a concern that we worry you'll get there and you won't have everything you need for Shabbat. Somebody have a question on this? Okay. Next halakha, that Erev Shabbat, what kind of meals should you have? Now I'll tell you where this is relevant. I'll tell you the halakha and I'll tell you it's relevant. You're not allowed to have on Erev Shabbat a big meal more than what you would have during the week. Even if it's like celebrating an engagement or anything like that. And the idea is that this is for Kavod Shabbat, that you should come into Shabbat with an appetite. And that applies throughout the entire day. In other words, even if you say you want to have a function, you're planning a big function that you want to have, don't have that on Friday. You can have this big, so the mitzvah will come to in a second. And he does say as well, if the Suda's time is on Erev Shabbat, so the example he gives is a bris or a pigeon aben, he says that's permissible, says the Ramor, and that's the minhag. The minhag is we will have a Suda celebrating a mitzvah of the day, but you can't say, look, we'll have the bris on Thursday afternoon, but we'll have the meal celebrating it, Friday. Or something like that. So you want to have, again, some kind of a charity event with a big breakfast. You shouldn't do that on Friday. You should do that on a different day of the week. Again, we're talking about if it's a big meal, much more than what you would have during the day. But if you want to eat without, kviyat suda, so then you're allowed to eat, and even a regular meal, a sandwich or whatever. So you're allowed to have that the whole day. It's a good idea it's a mitzvah, to stop having a meal with bread from 9.5 hours. So that's like 3:30ish.
It's advised.
It's advised.
It's not a
Mitzvah. Mitzvah lihimana. It's a mitzvah to refrain. That means it's a good thing, right? It's not an obligation. So you're not allowed to have a big meal on Friday. To have a normal meal you can have throughout the day, but once it's like late Friday afternoon, it's better not to have even a regular meal. You should only then be kind of snacking from that time onwards. Now I'll tell you where this comes up. This comes up this year for Rosh Hashanah and for Sukkot. Because what happens is, second day Rosh Hashanah, you come home, you want to have lunch, but you're now going into Shabbat. So the truth is, even if you like to have a nice big Rosh Hashanah lunch, for first day you can have it, but for second day, you should have a more subdued lunch. You can still have a nice lunch, but you shouldn't have a big lunch, second day Rosh Hashanah. Because if you have a big lunch, second day Rosh Hashanah, you're going to come into Shabbat without any kind of appetite. Same thing, second day Sukkot. Shouldn't have a big lunch, second day Sukkot. A little lunch, you come into Shabbat still with an appetite. I did look up that halacha in preparation for this year.
But if you're going to snack from like 3:30, surely if you're like eating more, just by snacking small things here and there.
You're not supposed to be snacking for 4 hours.
Yeah, because if you're snacking for that long, you're allowed to.
Well, obviously you've got to be intelligent about it, but we're laying down the parameters of the halakha, a snack versus a meal. Yeah.
Remember we learned early on about drinking alcohol.
Yes.
So there must be a huge issue about these like pre-Shabbos machayim stuff that people sometimes have. And I'm just thinking about it now in terms of what you should and shouldn't do.
Yeah.
But especially before Shabbos, to have whiskey and alcohol, if you have more than a certain amount, like we've learned before.
Yes. Of davening.
Yeah.
So I would certainly see it as being a problem of davening. As far as the problem of the meal, I can just tell you from a halachic aspect. In the halakha, they don't seem to see alcohol as being something that stunts one's appetite. On the contrary, they always talk about alcohol stimulating the appetite. I think I'm probably not enough of a drinker to really know if that's the case or not. But that I wouldn't think is too much of an issue. But the fact that, as you say, you're now going to be davening Mincha, Kabbalat, Shabbat, Ma'ariv, that person needs to be responsible. But that also, they lay out the measurements of what's okay. And the Mishna Brura said over there, he said, look, for different people it's different, basically. You got to know. And I'm certainly not in favor of a drinking culture. And I think that's not in terms of the spirit of the Torah, but I don't know if on that you can really disqualify it on halachic grounds. Okay, good. Then he says the exceptionally great people, anshe maaseh, people of great deeds, would even fast erev Shabbat. They fast every erev Shabbat, and the idea was that you then come into Friday with a nice, good appetite. But the Mishnah Brura adds in, of course, that this is only for people who will still come into Shabbat good and strong and enjoying Shabbat and whatever else. For many of us, I know, for example, I fasted Erev Shabbat a couple of months ago. It's not so lekker, you come into Shabbat, you're hungry, you're tired, it's not great. I remember the people that we went to for Friday night. So we made Kiddush. And I said, can we please sing a quick Shalom Aleichem? Can we make Kiddush? Can I please just eat some stuff and then we can carry on and make hamotzi and whatever else? Because I was really hungry and tired and it wasn't thirsty, it wasn't nice. So there are those who do it so that they'll have a good appetite, but that's obviously you've got to consider what's the way to really get there.
Also, sometimes if you eat a lot and if you don't eat for a long time, your stomach will become full and you can't when you after you eat a bit, then your stomach starts hurting.
Yes, so that's what you got to weigh up. He's saying for those people that fasting will increase their appetite and enjoyment of Shabbat. Okay, good for you. But as he said, for most people that isn't the case. Now, what happens if a person says that he's going to fast erev Shabbat? He accepts upon himself to fast erev Shabbat. When does the fast end? Does the fast end at Seita Kochavim, 3 stars?
3 stars.
Or does the fast end when the community finishes Ma'ariv? So he says that so one thing is that if it depends on what you specified. If at the time that you took on the fast, you specified, I'm only fasting until the community finishes davening, then that counts. right? You can do such a thing. If you didn't specify, then you've got to go until Tzeit HaKochavim, says the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah says, no, some say that you can eat as soon as they leave shul. Therefore, he wants to make a difference between a private fast and a communal fast. So a communal fast would be like the 10th of Tevet, right? The 10th of Tevet can fall on a Friday. So sometimes you go the 10th of Tevet into Shabbos. So there you'll wait until Tzedek Kochavim. But if it's a private personal fast, for example, a person's fasting for a yotzat or something like that, right? Well, bad dream will come to in a second. A person's fasting for a yotzat, so then he can specify that he's going to end his fast when the community finishes davening. Although the truth is, a lot of the time in our shuls, the community finishes davening, it's already after tzeit. So just keep an eye on that. You think about with a long, not in summer, but in winter, with a long Kabbalat Shabbat and a long drosha, and all the good things. So yeah.
Better to specify says
is it better? Yeah, yes, that's the killer. Good. Then now he says, if it's a fast for a bad dream, then you need to fast all the way until Tzeit HaKochavim. Because, and the reason for that is because even for a bad dream, some say you can even fast on Shabbat itself. So certainly you can fast, going into Shabbat. Others say as well that no, it's also fine to go to wait until shul finishes. But the general opinion, says the Mishna Brura, is like the Shulchan Aruch, that you should have that fast all the way until Shabbat comes out. Good. Chapter 250, preparing meals for Shabbat. Lovely section. You should wake up early on Friday to prepare your meals for Shabbat. Even if you have many servants, you should put an effort to prepare something yourself for Shabbat in order to honor it. And he gives different examples of how the great Amoraim would prepare the house, whether it was chopping the wood or cooking the food or sweeping or lighting the fire, all of those things. And every person should learn, and nobody should say, this is beneath my dignity, I don't do housework. Because for Shabbat, that really is your dignity. Now Ramah says you should sharpen the knives Erev Shabbat, because that's going to help you have, that's going to be honor of Shabbat. And the Mishnah Brura says it's going to help you have Shalom Bayit. Why would that help you have Shalom Bayit to have sharp knives?
Why for that?
Because you slice the meat like a mensch, and then everyone's happy, rather than, you try and you cut and it doesn't really cut so nicely, and you complain, right, Evan? That's right.
That's heavy with bluntness.
And then he says you should have a lot of meat, wine, and delicious things as much as you're able. So does this mean that you have to have meat and wine? So as we saw that it doesn't. You have meat and wine when, Theo?
If you like.
If you like it. If you like meat and wine, then have meat and wine. You don't like meat and wine, then don't have meat and wine. Have things that you're going to enjoy. I remember whenever we've had like a communal dinner here. Well, not as much as you're able, according to your means. In other words, somebody really doesn't have a lot of money, so shouldn't be irresponsible about it. Yes, however, we discussed this right at the beginning. I asked Rabbi Goldfein once, but at the same time, we have a principle we don't rely on miracles. So how do we balance that? On the one hand, we say, Hashem will pay you back for whatever you spend for Shabbos. On the other hand, we say, don't rely on miracles. So Rabbi Goldfein said, spend a little more than is reasonable. You can't be ridiculous about it. You can't say, "Oh no, that's fine. I'm just going to spend all my money on Shabbos." Then that would be relying on a miracle. But trust in Hashem a little more than what you would normally. So work out what your budget would normally allow you to spend on Shabbat. Spend a little extra.
Isn't that the case of Hillel and Shammai?
Sorry?
With the case of Hillel and Shammai.
Yes, he does bring in Hillel and Shammai, so that would be, and everyone agrees really that Shammai's way is the proper way. Hillel was just doing for trust in Hashem. So Shammai would, no, that's a different thing. Well, it speaks about not the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai, but Hillel and Shammai themselves. Shammai would go shopping every day, right? His wife didn't do the shopping, he did the shopping. He went to the shops. Always in all of Jewish history, the men used to do the shopping. It wasn't considered appropriate for women. It wasn't considered appropriate for women to go and exactly. So Shammai would go out to do the shopping, and you would see something in the shop that was really delicious and special, and you'd buy that and set it aside for Shabbat. You go out on Tuesday and you'd see something even better. So you'd say, okay, what I bought yesterday, I'm going to have for dinner tonight, and I'll buy this for Shabbat. You know, the next day he would, so every day he was honoring Shabbat and looking out for what was best for Shabbat. Let's just wrap up this section and we'll go further. So that's the idea. I mean, we've had here before, when we had a communal dinner and I wanted to have it milchik, and people saying, you're not allowed to have it milchik. Not allowed to have a milchik dinner on Shabbat. So it's simply not true, right? Of course you're allowed to have a milchik dinner on Shabbat, if that's what you enjoy. If you don't enjoy it, okay, so then rather have something else.
But most people don't enjoy
Sam.
With what he spent for what he said on Monday, this whatever is for Shabbos. Yeah, and then the next day, this is better than yesterday's. So I'll have yesterday's tonight for supper, and I'll have this one for tomorrow.
Yes.
Only for Saturday.
For Shabbos, yes.
Yeah. Does he still get paid back in a way for what he bought yesterday?
Good question. So it seems yes, because the Gemara uses the expression, all his eating was for the sake of Shabbat. In other words, every meal he had was considered an honor of Shabbat, because every meal he had was nice things that he bought for Shabbat. So I think it would be. Great.
But surely, what Shabbat did with on Shabbos, I mean, that was in all his meals, like they kept having to rely on miracles. Like all his meals were like.
Why is he relying on miracles?
Because he, for his first night he gets his first night for Monday he buys food, then he comes back on Tuesday, and he's eating that food on Tuesday, he's going to get paid for by Hashem. Then on Tuesday, on Wednesday, he comes back to eat Tuesday food today. Every night he's like food's getting paid for by, isn't it like a bit of a miracle?
I'm not sure. No, yeah, Thursday it might be a miracle, but Hashem does miracles. I mean, I don't think that's a problem of faith. Yeah, it's not necessarily relying on it. And how do you know that every day is going to be better food, you know? I would imagine most weeks, what he found on Monday, it turned out to be the best. Okay, good. Next day.
Depends on the shop.
That's the miracle.
Depends what you're buying. Depends what you're buying.
Yeah, well, they sold it.
Good. Biltong, right? Biltong lasts. Chapter 251. Don't do melacha on Erev Shabbat from Mincha onwards. So if you do melacha on Shabbat from Mincha onwards, Shulchan Aruch says you won't see siman bracha. You won't see a blessing from that work. And what that means, says the Mishna Brura, is even if you're going to, how can you say you're not going to see bracha? Let's say you run a shoe shop and you decide, even though it's after Mincha and Shabbos, I'm going to keep open, and you sell 500 shoes, make a lot of money. So how can you say you're not going to see bracha from that? You've seen bracha from that. Okay, so what he says is, what you make here, you'll lose elsewhere. Right? You'll have a fast Friday afternoon and a slow Monday. That's how he explains it. So you shouldn't do work. Now, shouldn't do work from Mincha on Shabbat. When's Mincha on Shabbat?
Yeah.
Well, the first question is, Mincha Gedola or Mincha Katana? When's Mincha Gedola? Yeah, about 1:30, and Mincha Katana, yeah, like 3:34, let's call it 4. So there's quite a difference, right, between 1:30 and 4. You should knock off work at 1:30 or you should knock off work at 4?
Cape Town takes
Cape Town's one area in which Cape Town's machmir.
So what's the 12?
So he says, so it's a machloket. Shulchan Aruch brings a machloket. Some say mincha gedola, some say mincha katana. And Mishna Brura says you don't lose by relying on the lenient opinion. In other words, you want to work until mincha katana. That's absolutely fine. And of course, it's shaot zmaniyot. It's the times based on winter, summer, and bigibran and whatnot. However, that is for your own personal business. That's for your own personal business when you run the shoe shop and you decide when to close up. But what if you're an employee? So you turn around to your boss and say, by the way, boss, I'm knocking off, knocking off at 4 o'clock today or at 1:30 today, I want to be machmir. So he says, no, you can't do that. Let's say you never put in your contract what will be on Friday afternoons. So now you come to your boss, you say, listen, I need to get home for Shabbos. It's winter, I need to get home. So he says, no, you work here till the same time as everyone else. What can you, if you want to have a claim, and let's say he says, look, I'm prepared to do what's right, but we didn't discuss this in the contract. You can I'll even let you keep according to halakha. but the minimum according to halacha, right? You tell me what your law says, what is the minimum that you need time in order to get ready for Shabbat? So how would you answer that question? He says enough time to get home, fill up, he says a barrel of water, I would say fill up your urn, light your candle, roast a little fish, and that's it. And that's it. Not even enough time to shower. You cannot demand to get home for Shabbos with enough time to shower. You can demand to get home for Shabbos with enough time to put on your urn, light your candles, and fry an egg. Right? How long is that whole thing? 10 minutes? What? No. So I don't mean get home and 10 minutes, right?
That takes about an hour.
No, not smoked fish. Roast, just fry a little bit of fish. Like frying an egg. Yeah. I don't think half an hour. I think 10 minutes. I think 10 minutes. Yeah. Listen, it takes you 90 seconds to fill up the urn, 90 seconds to light candles. It's give you 7 minutes to fry the egg. It doesn't take me that long to fry an egg, you know.
And to fry fish, it takes like 2 minutes.
Yeah. So let's call it 10 minutes, you know, all in. So you don't have a lot of time. That's the point I wanted to make. Fine.
So the time is this inclusive time to get home?
No, so that obviously you got to work out. That's not going to be standard, you know. You need to work out how long you need to get home. Yeah. So now he says, but this is all speaking as a, you know, in a set way. In other words, Jared owns his shoe shop, and every Friday he's got to set what his closing time is. So he'll set his closing time around the time mincha katana. That's the right time to close. But if, you know, 1 week, it's like a really big week to sell shoes, you know, everyone's coming in and whatever, and he can see it's going to be, so he can decide that week he's going to keep opening, you know, some kind of public holiday or whatever, that week he's going to extend his hours, you know, or during the summer, right, during summer season, you know, he can go on a little bit later, that week he's going to extend his hours, that would be acceptable. It's only to make a set thing that every week I'm working until late, that's going to be problematic. And you are also allowed to write, for this same reason, you're allowed to write personal letters and that kind of thing. Even though you can say a letter is melacha, right? But the idea of a personal letter, it's not something that you do as a chore every Friday afternoon. It's like an ad hoc kind of thing. Are you at what times of the day are you allowed to fix your clothes, sew on buttons, all that kind of thing? Anytime.
If it's full.
Anytime over the course of the day, even though it's getting quite late, you know, it's getting late. So for Shabbos. So you want to fix up your Shabbos pants or whatever, you're allowed to do that, even though it's Erev Shabbat and you're doing work. No, that's for the sake of Shabbat. All the same thing, exactly. Now, what if your brother asks you to iron his shirt? So now it's not for your honor of Shabbat anymore. It's still for Shabbat, still for his Shabbat. That's provided, says the Ramor. That's provided that you're not. That's provided that you're not taking money for it. Yeah, because once you're taking money for it, now it's your job, right? You're not doing it as a favor for the honor of Shabbat. Now you're doing it for work. And the same thing, he says, you're allowed to write Torah insights on Friday afternoon as well. But you're not allowed to scribe for somebody else. If somebody else wants you to write down, they've written out their book and they want you to type it up on the computer or whatever, you're not allowed to do that. You are allowed to get a haircut also throughout the day, even from a Jewish barber. Why does he say even from a Jewish barber?
To give you money.
Because he shouldn't be open, right? The Jewish barber should have closed already. So he's still open. No, it's still fine. And in fact, he is actually allowed to be open because he is clearly doing it for the honor of Shabbat. Yeah, he is doing it for a job, but it still clearly is for the honor of Shabbat. He's giving haircuts for the honor of Shabbat. Yeah. Okay, but he says people don't. He says, but maybe you should have davened mincha before. We had that halakha we learned earlier. You shouldn't be doing all these activities before you daven mincha. He says, if you haven't davened mincha before, he says, well, since we're going to shul for Shabbat, you know, we see that we're not worried that you're going to end up missing davening mincha, because mincha is part of the big Shabbat story. I will say once it was Erev Shabbos and I hadn't had a haircut, and my hair was pretty wild, and I was thinking his time was getting a little bit late. Maybe I should go for the haircut, maybe I shouldn't. And I thought, you know what? I need to get the haircut, let me go. And I walked in and there was Ness and Brecht, right? So we had our haircuts together, and it was pretty close to Shabbat, but we both made it. And that's in accordance with this halacha.
I was a double for
Did you? So now you said, but then you saw me coming and you thought, oh, now I'm really in trouble. So now he says as well that you should learn a little less Erev Shabbat. And what that means is that, like at yeshivas, they take off afternoon Seder early, instead of learning right up until 4 o'clock, and Shabbos in at 6. So you'll stop at 1 and everyone's got time to 1:30, everyone's got time to shower and get dressed and whatever else and get everything ready for Shabbat. In Israel, I don't know if they still were. I know years ago, in Israel, yeshivas would often close on Friday. They wouldn't have Seder on Fridays. That people would have time. When Rabbi Golfan always told us when Rabbi Gifter opened up a branch of Telz there, so he thought, no, it says you have less learning on Friday. It doesn't say you have no learning on Friday. So he also instituted like a half day. Good. Chapter 252. What are you allowed to do on Erev Shabbat that will be completed on Shabbat? So the first principle is that all of your own stuff that's going to end up being completed on its own accord over the course of Shabbat, you're allowed to put that in motion. So he gives examples. Soaking dyes, you put the things in the water, and they would then soak and make the dyes or whatever else. Or soaking your flax, or putting your bundles of flax in the oven that they would dry out. Putting wool in the dyeing kettle, if it's not on the fire, to put in there to soak. I'll explain more about that in a second. So all of those kinds of cases, even leaving out traps for fish and for other animals, you put those all out Erev Shabbat, even though they're going to be working on Shabbat, that's not a problem, because your kalim, your items, your utensils are not Jewish. Right? They don't have to stop working on Shabbat. So this comes up today. We think about computers. Don't know if younger people know what fax machines are, right? There used to be these things called fax machines. It was like an email. It was like an email on paper.
Government still using it.
Yeah.
What is this?
So, everyone asks, can you have your fax machine on Shabbat? It's getting faxes over Shabbat. So it's all that same kind of principle. What he does say, however, is when it comes to things where we're worried, we have this general concern where we're worried that you will end up maybe breaking Shabbat. So he gave the example of soaking your wool in this dyeing pot. But if it's got a fire going underneath, so then you can't do that, because we're worried that you're going to stoke the fire. And if it's not sealed, even if there's no fire, but it's hot, but it's not sealed, we're worried that you're going to come and stir it. And stirring it is also problematic, like with soup. You can't stir your soup on Shabbat, so that's going to be cooking the same thing over here, that you can't cook that. And then he goes into what about if somebody who isn't Jewish is getting involved in this malacha? So he says you're allowed to sell stuff to a non-Jew and even give him the goods close to Shabbat, as long as he's left your home by the time Shabbat starts. So he comes into your home, you put stuff on Gumtree, comes into your home, takes everything that that he's going to take, as long as he's left your home, your area of Shabbat, because then you can see that it's not you're not still doing business as Shabbat comes in.
What if you lose the sale? They're out to leave a minute before going.
Well, I mean, you shouldn't make the deal in that kind of. I mean, you can do it, but he's got to leave before Shabbat. Now he says some want to say, what if he's got an area in your house where you're like, well, designate it, set it aside, so that room, your storeroom becomes him. You've got the garage, right? The garage is yours over Shabbat, and you sell him whatever in the garage, and he can now come and go over the course of Shabbat, because that's his area. So the Ramah says there are those who permit this. However, you should be strict. That's what the Ramah says. Mr. Brura says so that he won't do this kind of thing regularly. And the Achronim say, the Mishnah Brura brings the Achronim say, no, really, you've got to be strict with all of this because of, as you say, Marit Ayin, unless there's really going to be a great loss, right? It's like Mark wanted to propose. Unless there's going to be a big loss if you let this go. And then they go into what if he's a very scary gangster, so okay, they go into those halachot as well. Yeah. Then he says, now what about giving your clothes to a non-Jewish washer, right? Taking them into the dry cleaner, or taking in skins to be tanned, close to Shabbat. He says that's fine, as long as you've already set the price before you're paying him for the job, not for the time, as we've seen in the past. And as long as you don't tell him, do it on Shabbat. And also, as long as he's doing it in his home, not in your home. You can't have him coming in and doing your washing in your home over Shabbat. You can do the washing at his place. Okay. Now he says, if you see... now they go into this idea of Tovat Hana, doing it as a favor. What if he says, I'll do it for you as a favor? So... so basically that would be fine. That would be fine because he's doing it again of his own accord. However, the Ramah says, some say if he's doing it as a favor, this is problematic. Because Asur Be'erev Shabbat, Yesh Cholkin, Imosel B'chinam. Some say you can only do it if he's doing it as a favor, because the question is he doing it for himself or is he doing it for you? If you paid him, so he's doing it for himself. If he's doing it as a favor, maybe he's doing it for himself because he wants to do it. Or maybe he feels like maybe one day you'll do him a favor or that kind of thing. So that's an argument there. Evan.
Point before. If you close the wash, you do something for Shabbat, and being back on Shabbat. Can you do that?
Yes, good question. I think that's coming up in just a minute. Yes, that's what's coming up now. We'll see that in just a second.
When it says that the person can't clean your clothes in your house, but in his house he can do it.
Yes.
Does that mean his warehouse and house, or like just his house?
His place.
So it's his house, not his warehouse.
Wherever. His place. As long as it's not your place. That's the main thing over here, yeah.
If it's like someone else's place, and he just said, can I wash, and he washed my clothes. So what happens if
In another Jew's house.
in another person? Or
Another Jew's house? It's problematic to do it in a Jew's house. Let's put it that way. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, last one.
And if it's like a lower, like, for instance, suit.
Yes.
Everyone knows that this is Kanshmero's pink suit.
Yes. So would that be problematic? We'll see that coming up as well. Good question. That's halacha number 3. If it's a public malacha and everyone knows that this belongs to a Jew and he's doing it in a public place, then it's better to be strict. So in other words, if he's doing it on the street corner, if he's washing your pink suit on the street corner, then everyone can see, even though you did everything else correctly, it's better to be strict. He doesn't say it's forbidden, but he says it's good to be strict in that scenario. And number 4, there's now Evan's case. You made the deal. Even though he did the malacha on Shabbat, you are allowed to wear it on Shabbat itself. Because he was doing it for himself, not for you. That's the Shulchan Aruch. However, the Ramah says, some say this is forbidden, as long as, if he actually did it on Shabbat. And if he did that malacha on Shabbat, you're going to have to wait till after Shabbat, the amount of time that it took for him to do it. So let's say it took him an hour to dry clean your suit, so you can only wear that suit again from an hour after Shabbat. And that, says the Ramah, is the lachatchila, is the correct way to behave in the first instance, unless you really need it on Shabbat. Let's say it's your only suit, right? So you actually need it, so then you can rely on that ruling of the Shulchan Aruch and wear it. If maybe he did it Erev Shabbat, let's say he gave it to him an hour before Shabbat, maybe he did that straight away, and he'd bring it to you on Shabbat. So there, certainly that's okay. If you don't know that it was even done on Shabbat, it's only an issue if you know that it was done on Shabbat. And also, this whole discussion only comes up if he brought it to you, but you're not allowed to go into the dry cleaner on Shabbat to pick up your suits, even though you paid for it in advance and whatever else. If he brought it to your house, then we have this discussion. Okay, good. Next halakha. Now, he says you're allowed to open up the watering for your watering system for your garden, you know, and then it drip irrigation or whatever comes over the course of Shabbat, or you could leave the medication on your eye on Shabbat. Even though you're not allowed to apply medication on Shabbat, you put it in before Shabbat, so you're allowed to leave it on. The other one was, they didn't used to wash their clothes as often or shower as often, and they didn't have deodorant. So they found other ways. They would, like incense, make like this smoky incense and hang their clothes over that incense to make the clothes smell better. So that served as both laundry and what's it called? Deodorant. Thank you, in one. So you're not allowed to do that on Shabbat. But if you set that up Erev Shabbat, that's going to be okay. Set up your olives, set up your grapes to be pressed over Shabbat, right? All of those kinds of things. And now he says, what about a water mill? You've got the water wheel that grinds the wheat. Can you put in the wheat for that Erev Shabbat? So he says that's also fine. Now Ramon says, hold on a second. What about the noise that makes? See, most of these things, it's just say you're doing it. But here, you can hear the mill grinding the wheat over the course of Shabbat. So the Ramah says, according to the Shulchan Aruch, we're not worried about it. However, there are those who are concerned. Every time that there is a concern of some kind of noisy melacha on Shabbat, they say that you can't do it. And that is, lecharchila, we don't do something that makes that kind of noise. But if it's going to cause a loss, then you can go lenient. So this comes up in the discussions. They talk about having your TV on a timer, or even setting alarm clocks, dishwasher on a timer, right? All those kinds of things.
Alarm clocks also.
You've got the same question, right? It's Hashma'at Kol. You know, is this going to be? Yes, you said it Erev Shabbat, but now that it's going on Shabbat, is that an issue? Right? I'm not saying whether it's forbidden or permitted. I'm just saying this is the siman that comes up that they're comparing it to.
No, because Moshe Feinstein brings that it's something that would be something like a TV or something else, but in terms of something that would just make a noise.
Yes.
How is that? Why would that be a problem?
Why would it be a problem?
Because you put on your phone, you're not going to touch your phone. You're putting it somewhere else. You normally would switch it off. But you put it on somewhere else where you won't have.
Yes. Well, I'm saying that. I mean, you can make. Well, this is exactly the point. You can make comparisons. You can say it is comparable. It isn't comparable. You can compare back and forth. But this is kind of the basis. That's what I'm really saying. This is the basis for comparison. Then he speaks about a clock, right? So setting up the clock, even though that's going to be chiming the hours for Shabbat. He says because there everybody knows that you did it from yesterday. So that's the question that comes up as well. Is it clear that you did this from yesterday, or does it seem you maybe did this for today? Now he says you shouldn't go out close to Shabbat with your needle in your hand or your quill in your hand, because maybe you're going to forget and go out with it. That would be, for example, you keep things in your jacket pocket. Let's say you got a jacket, you sometimes wear it for Shabbat and sometimes for the week. You've got your pen in your pocket. Friday afternoon, you should start taking those things out your pocket already. But tefillin you're allowed to wear, because we're not worried that you'll forget that you're wearing tefillin. You're always aware of your tefillin. Then we have a mitzvah to actually check your pockets before you go out on Shabbat, because maybe there's something that you're not allowed to carry. Now it seems we don't do that so much in the Erev, right? But if you're living outside the Erev, so you've got your little Shabbos dance every time before you walk out, right? You just do that quick pocket check. Now let's start, and that's 252. Let's start on 253. I think we'll, please God, get to exactly where we need to get to. We haven't done all the Mishna Bruras, we've done a good amount. So this is now the section of Kira and Tanur, stoves and ovens. So what's the idea of stoves and ovens? That so the stove is where you put it on top, and the oven is where you put it inside. And one of the main issue again here is, are we worried that you're going to be coming and stoking the coals over Shabbat or anything like that? So he says, if you've got a stove, right, where you put things on top, you've got space for 2 stoves, and you light it normally with like a straw or with wood or with that kind of stuff, you're not allowed to put food on even Erev Shabbat unless it's already been fully cooked, and the more it cooks, the worse it gets. In other words, we have some foods that the more it cooks, the better it gets. That's not what we want over here. We want food that's got to be fully cooked and is not going to be improved by further cooking. Why? Because then you have no motivation to stoke the coals over Shabbat. You're not interested in this food at all. Or it's got to be completely raw, because if it's completely raw, then you know that there's no chance that you're going to be able to have it, that you're going to be able to have it tonight, and it's only definitely going to be tomorrow. The Mishna brings, this is very important, this thing of completely raw only applies to meat. Does not apply to vegetables. Vegetables are completely raw, doesn't count, because vegetables are quick to cook. Oh, it's a raw vegetable. So firstly, you can eat raw vegetables. That's the whole point. And secondly, even if they are half cooked, that's also fine to eat. Meat, you can't eat raw meat. You can't eat half cooked meat. Meat takes a long time to cook. So raw meats that went in right before Shabbat, that you're not going to worry about anymore. But that only applies to meat. And there is some discussion, I haven't looked in the Mishna Brura notes, that there is some discussion about whether this still applies today with our kind of cooking things that cook pretty quickly. I think there is a decent chance if you put on the meat on Friday that in some situations that it could be real. Slow cook is a good example.
But like including meat, there's the fish and chicken.
I don't think so. No, meat, basar. Chicken maybe, fish no, and mutton is meat. Yeah. So now he says, okay, so since it's raw, you're not worried about it. So it's got to be one of those two. Either it's completely cooked or it's completely raw. Either way, there's zero motivation, incentive for you to stoke the coals in that situation. But if it's a little bit cooked, or even it's fully cooked, but the more cooked, the better it gets, then we worry that you will end up stoking the coal, and you're only allowed to leave it if you actually swept out all of the fuel from the stove. Or that you like covered it with with earth to dampen the fire. So that would be fine, because then you're not going to stoke it, or you're either going to see it and remember it, or it's not going to really help because you've already doused it somewhat. And if you put in one new piece of raw meat, then that's as if it's all raw meat, because you're not going to end up eating this dish and maybe ending up getting a piece of the raw meat. Yeah. So that's what you're going to do. Or what we'll see is, the idea of like covering the knobs or covering where the fire is, that kind of thing. That's considered like sweeping out the coals, because there it's like you've made a simon, you made a sign that it's not going to be. If you used a proper fuel like wood or olive seeds or that kind of thing, then that's a proper fuel. But if you're using like straw, which is not such a proper fuel, then you are allowed to leave it. Because you're not going to end up really stoking those coals. I mean, there aren't really much coals to stoke. If you've got two pots sitting next to one another on this stove, and the one part has been swept and the other part hasn't been swept, so you're allowed to put it on the plate that has been prepared, even though it's going to be, the one that hasn't been properly prepared might heat it up a little bit. That's not a problem. We'll leave it there. They'll go into ovens and that. Unfortunately, we didn't get to the ovens, but we're not too far behind. And that's it for this time. Shka. Behatzlacha for the fun.